I never planned to reveal my penthouse at Grandma Eleanor's 75th birthday dinner, but when the conversation turned to real estate, I casually mentioned my Central Park view. The restaurant fell silent. Amber, my perpetually spoiled sister, froze mid-bite before erupting. She screamed accusations while Dad dropped his fork in shock. Then Aunt Meredith stood up and revealed a family secret that made everyone stop breathing. 20 years of favoritism suddenly made perfect, painful sense. That night changed everything we thought we knew about our family. Growing up in Oak Park, a comfortable suburb west of Chicago, I learned early that family love wasn't distributed equally. My sister Amber, 2 years younger than me, became the sun our family orbited around from almost the moment she was born. I can pinpoint the exact moment I first understood this inequality. I was 8 years old, sitting at our kitchen table finishing my math homework. Mom burst through the door, Amber trailing behind with an uncharacteristic shy smile. "James," Mom called out excitedly to my father. She got in. Amber got accepted to Lakeside Academy. Dad rushed in from his home office, beaming with pride. Lakeside was the most prestigious private school in our area, known for its connections and alumni network more than its academics. They hugged Amber, both talking rapidly about what a bright future this meant for her. "This calls for a celebration dinner," Dad announced, grabbing his keys. "Let's go to Gino's." No one mentioned that, just a month earlier, I had brought home a report card with straight A's from my public elementary school, or that my teachers had recommended me for the gifted program. That news had been met with distracted nods, and a "good job, Drew," before the conversation moved on to Amber's dance recital. While Amber attended Lakeside Academy with its manicured grounds and state-of-the-art facilities, I continued at Franklin Elementary. Each morning, Dad would drive Amber to her school first, making a special trip just for her, before dropping me off on his way to his real estate office. The contrast between our educational settings couldn't have been more stark. Lakeside had a professional theater, Olympic-sized swimming pool, and classes capped at 12 students. Franklin had outdated textbooks, overcrowded classrooms, and a playground with equipment from the 1970s. "Your sister needs more structure and individual attention," Mom explained when I once asked why I couldn't go to Lakeside too. "You're naturally bright, Drew. You'll do fine wherever you go." Being fine became my family designation. Amber needed special attention, extra help, additional opportunities. I was just fine. My parents weren't cruel people. James Russell was a successful real estate agent who had built his business from scratch. Catherine, my mother, worked part-time as an interior designer, often staging homes for my father's listings. They provided a comfortable middle-class life, but the disparities in how they treated their children were impossible to ignore. New clothes arrived regularly for Amber, always from trendy stores at the mall. I received bags of hand-me-downs from our cousins or budget department store clothes purchased during sales. Amber's room was redecorated every few years to reflect her changing interests. My furniture remained the same set from when I was a toddler. The one person who seemed to notice the imbalance was my grandmother, Eleanor, Mom's mother. She lived about 30 minutes away and visited often. Unlike my parents, Grandma Eleanor paid attention to my achievements and interests. "You have a good head for numbers," she told me once after helping with my math homework. "And you think before you speak. Those are rare qualities, Drew." Her visits became bright spots in my childhood, moments when I felt truly seen. She brought me books about subjects I was interested in and listened intently when I talked about school. One spring afternoon when I was 12, I came home early from school to find Dad's home office empty but his work journal open on the desk. I wasn't snooping intentionally, but a column labeled Kids College caught my eye. There, in my father's neat handwriting, was a detailed account of a college fund for Amber, with monthly contributions dating back several years. The running total made my eyes widen. I flipped through the pages, looking for my name, certain there must be a similar fund for me. There was nothing. That evening, I overheard my parents discussing Amber's summer activities. "The camp is expensive," Mom was saying, "but it could really help her confidence, and they take them on these amazing trips to museums and cultural events." "She deserves the best opportunities," Dad replied. "We'll make it work." I quietly retreated to my room, a cold realization settling in my stomach. It wasn't just that Amber received more attention or nicer things. My parents were actively investing in her future, while assuming I would somehow manage on my own. That night marked the first time I felt real resentment, but also the birth of a determination that would shape my future. If I couldn't count on my parents' support, I would need to create my own opportunities. High school only widened the gap between Amber's privileged existence and my increasingly independent life. While she continued at the private Lakeside Academy's upper school, I attended Westfield High, the local public school. By this point, the contrast in how we were treated had become so normalized that I rarely bothered to comment on it. What my parents didn't realize was that I had begun to excel in ways they never noticed. I maintained a 4-point GPA while working 20 hours a week at a local bookstore. I joined the debate team and the investment club, developing skills that would later prove invaluable. My guidance counselor regularly told me I was one of the most promising students in our class. Meanwhile, Amber struggled academically, despite the advantages of small class sizes and private tutors my parents readily provided. Her text messages to Mom when she received a poor grade would trigger immediate action. Dad would make calls to teachers and Mom would arrange for additional help. "Your sister processes information differently," Mom would explain when I questioned the double standard. "She needs more support." My grandmother remained my steadfast ally. During my sophomore year, she gave me a book about personal finance and investing. "I've always believed that financial independence gives you choices," she told me. "Start small, but start early." When I turned 16, Grandma Eleanor helped me open my first investment account with $500 she had saved for me. "Don't tell your parents just yet," she advised. "This is between us until you're ready to show them what you can do." At first, I was confused by her secrecy, but I soon understood. My parents had created a narrative about their children that would be difficult to change. Amber was the star with untapped potential who needed their resources. I was the self-sufficient one who would always be fine on my own. Aunt Meredith, my father's younger sister, began to take notice of the disparity during her visits. Unlike my father, who had followed a conventional path into real estate after college, Meredith had built a successful career in corporate finance in Boston. She visited Chicago several times a year, and often took me out for lunch during these trips. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me during one of these outings. Always watching, always thinking 3 steps ahead. She began sending me articles about business and finance, encouraging my interest in investing. Like my grandmother, she seemed to recognize something in me that my parents missed entirely. The contrast in our treatment reached its peak when Amber turned 18. For her birthday, my parents presented her with a brand new silver Audi, complete with a massive red bow on the hood. The car cost more than what many families in our neighborhood earned in a year. "She needs reliable transportation," Dad explained at the dinner table that night, "and she's earned it with her hard work." I bit back the urge to point out that Amber's grades remained mediocre at best, and that she had never held a job. Instead, I excused myself and walked the 10 blocks to my evening shift at the bookstore, the same way I had been commuting for the past 2 years. That spring, I was accepted to the University of Illinois with a partial academic scholarship. It wasn't enough to cover all expenses, but combined with my savings from work and a student loan, I could manage. My parents offered minimal congratulations, immediately pivoting to discuss Amber's college applications to several expensive private universities, despite her modest academic record. A few weeks later, Amber's private school held an elaborate graduation ceremony followed by a lavish party my parents hosted at a country club. During the party, I stepped outside for some air and overheard my father talking with a business colleague near the terrace. "Amber's the one with real potential," Dad was saying. "Once she figures out what she wants, the sky's the limit. I'm already planning to bring her into the business after college. She has the perfect personality for real estate." "What about your son?" the colleague asked. "Drew? He'll be fine," Dad replied with a dismissive wave. "He's always been independent, does his own thing. But Amber, she's special. She just needs the right opportunities." I walked away before they could notice me, a strange mixture of hurt and resolve solidifying within me. It was the moment I decided to stop hoping for recognition from my parents and instead focus entirely on building my own future, one they couldn't minimize or dismiss. "What about your son?" the colleague asked. University life provided me the freedom I had craved. At the University of Illinois, no one knew me as Amber's brother or had preconceived notions about which Russell sibling had potential. I was judged solely on my own merits, and I thrived in that environment. My investment account, started with Grandma Eleanor's $500, had already grown modestly thanks to some careful stock picks. I continued to add to it with small amounts from my work earnings, focusing on companies I researched thoroughly. Amber, meanwhile, enrolled at Northwestern University, an expensive private institution where my parents paid full tuition. She pledged a prestigious sorority and quickly immersed herself in the social scene. Her social media posts showed a whirlwind of parties, spring break trips, and shopping excursions. During my sophomore year, I received a phone call from Grandma Eleanor. Her normally strong voice sounded frail. "I've had a bit of a health scare," she told me. "Nothing to worry about too much, but the doctors want to run some tests." The bit of a health scare turned out to be early-stage breast cancer. I immediately adjusted my schedule to visit her regularly, taking the bus to her house every Sunday to help with errands, cook meals for the week, or simply keep her company during her treatments. "You don't need to come every week, Drew," she protested mildly. "I want to," I replied simply. Amber visited once, briefly, bringing a bouquet of flowers before rushing off to a sorority event. My parents checked in periodically, but were busy with work and supporting Amber's increasingly expensive lifestyle. During these Sunday visits, Grandma Eleanor and I would often discuss my investments and career plans. She introduced me to her financial advisor, a kind older gentleman who was impressed by my knowledge and offered additional guidance. By the end of my sophomore year, I had secured a competitive summer internship at a financial services firm in Chicago. The position paid well enough that I could afford a small studio apartment near campus for my junior year, eliminating my dormitory costs. I continued to live frugally, investing the difference and watching my modest portfolio grow. That fall, I met Professor Walsh, who taught advanced corporate finance. After I earned the highest grade on the midterm exam, he invited me to his office hours. "You have an unusual level of practical knowledge for an undergraduate," he noted. "Have you thought about where you want to take this after graduation?" Under his mentorship, I began to formulate more concrete career goals. Professor Walsh had connections at several prestigious firms in New York and Chicago, and he suggested I might be suited for investment management. "It's competitive," he warned, "but you have the analytical skills and the temperament for it." With his encouragement, I applied for and secured a highly sought-after junior year internship at Meridian Capital, a well-respected investment firm in Chicago. The experience confirmed my career path and opened doors I hadn't imagined possible. Through all of this, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Our interactions had fallen into a predictable pattern. Brief phone calls where my parents asked cursory questions about my studies before enthusiastically sharing Amber's latest adventures or achievements, most of which seemed to involve social connections rather than academic or professional accomplishments. That Thanksgiving, I returned home for the holiday to find Amber unexpectedly there as well. She had normally spent college breaks traveling with friends, her expenses covered by our parents. Over dinner, it emerged that Amber had decided to change her major for the third time, now entering her fourth year at Northwestern with no clear path to graduation. "Marketing just wasn't the right fit," she explained, picking at her food. "I'm thinking psychology might be better." "Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart," Mom said supportively. Later that evening, I overheard my parents discussing Amber's situation in hushed tones. "She's just taking time to find her passion," Dad insisted. "Not everyone follows a linear path." "I know," Mom sighed, "but another year of tuition wasn't in the budget." "We'll figure it out," Dad replied. "Maybe she can work with me part-time to get some real-world experience. In fact, I've been thinking she might do well in real estate. She has the personality for it." The next morning, Aunt Meredith arrived for coffee and pulled me aside. "Did they tell you the latest?" she asked quietly. When I shook my head, she continued. "Amber dropped out. Completely. She's been out of school since September but didn't want to tell your parents until she figured things out. They've already bought her a condo downtown, and your dad is creating a position for her at his company. The revelation should have angered me, but I felt strangely detached. The pattern was so established by now that I could almost predict what would happen. Amber would struggle in the position created for her, my parents would make excuses and provide additional support, and the cycle would continue. "Did they tell you the latest?" she asked quietly. What I couldn't have predicted was how this moment would solidify my resolve to succeed on my own terms. If my family couldn't see my value, I would create a life so undeniably successful that it would be impossible to ignore. Through Professor Walsh's connections and my internship performance, I received multiple job offers. After careful consideration, I accepted a position at Kingston Financial Group in New York City, a prestigious firm known for its rigorous standards and excellent advancement opportunities. "New York?" Grandma Eleanor said when I called to tell her. "That's wonderful, Drew. Your grandfather always wanted to visit there." I promised to bring her for a visit once I was settled, a promise I intended to keep. Her cancer was in remission, but the treatments had aged her, and I was acutely aware of how precious our time together had become. My starting salary at Kingston was modest by New York standards, but substantial compared to most entry-level positions. I found a tiny studio apartment in Washington Heights, far from the glamorous Manhattan neighborhoods but affordable, and with a reasonable commute to the financial district. The space was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette so small I could touch both walls simultaneously, but it was mine. From the beginning, I established a disciplined financial routine that my colleagues found either impressive or slightly insane. I brought lunch from home every day, limited social outings to once a week, and lived on 40% of my income. 30% went into retirement accounts, and 30% into my investment portfolio. At Kingston, I immersed myself in learning every aspect of the business. I volunteered for additional projects, arrived early, and stayed late. While other new associates complained about the workload or political navigation required, I found the environment invigorating. Here, results mattered more than personality or connections. My direct supervisor, Thomas Blake, took notice of my dedication and began assigning me to more complex projects. By the end of my first year, I had established a reputation as someone reliable who could handle challenging analytical tasks. Meanwhile, through careful research and some calculated risks, my personal investment portfolio was performing exceptionally well. I had developed a specialty in identifying undervalued mid-market companies poised for growth, and several of my early investments had already doubled in value. During my regular calls with Grandma Eleanor, I shared abbreviated versions of my progress, conscious that she might inadvertently relay information to my parents. With Aunt Meredith, who visited New York regularly for business, I was more forthcoming. "You're building something remarkable," she commented during one dinner. "But does anyone else in the family know?" I shrugged. "They've never been particularly interested in my finances." "That's not the point, Drew. You've achieved more in 2 years than most people do in a decade. Don't you want them to know?" "Not yet," I replied after a moment's consideration. "I'm not doing this for their approval." The truth was more complicated. Part of me wanted to maintain my privacy until my success was so substantial it couldn't be minimized or attributed to luck. Another part, one I was less proud of, wanted them to continue underestimating me until the reveal would be truly shocking. During a Christmas visit home, I got a clearer picture of Amber's situation. Despite her title as junior marketing director at our father's company, her role seemed to consist primarily of social media posts and accompanying him to networking events. She still lived in the downtown condo our parents had purchased, drove a newer model luxury car than her first Audi, and took frequent vacations that appeared on her Instagram feed. "Business development trips," Dad explained, when I casually inquired about one such vacation to Aspen. "Networking is crucial in real estate." I nodded and changed the subject, choosing not to point out that skiing with sorority friends rarely constituted business development. By my third year at Kingston, I had received 2 promotions, and my salary had nearly doubled. My investment portfolio had grown to a level that generated significant passive income. I continued my frugal lifestyle, my colleagues unaware that the unassuming Drew Russell who brought leftovers for lunch had a net worth approaching 7 figures. It was during this period that I met Rachel Sullivan, an architect with a firm that specialized in commercial renovations. We connected at a client appreciation event, where I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and unpretentious confidence. Unlike previous women I had dated, who often lost interest when they discovered my modest apartment and apparent lack of interest in displaying wealth, Rachel valued substance over appearance. Our relationship developed naturally, based on genuine compatibility rather than superficial attractions. "You're different from other finance guys I've met," she told me, after we had been dating for a few months. "Less flash, more substance." I found myself sharing more with Rachel than I had with anyone besides Grandma Eleanor and Aunt Meredith. One evening, after dinner at her apartment, I told her about my family dynamics and my private financial success. "So essentially, you're secretly wealthy while living like a graduate student?" she clarified, looking amused. "I wouldn't say wealthy," I hedged. "Comfortable. And your family has no idea?" "My grandmother and aunt do. The rest think I'm barely getting by in an entry-level job." Rachel considered this. "It's your right to keep your finances private, but at some point, doesn't continuing the charade serve their narrative that you're less successful than your sister?" Her question stayed with me, prompting deeper reflection about my motivations. Was I maintaining privacy out of principle, or was I waiting for the perfect moment of vindication? "My grandmother and aunt do. The rest think I'm barely getting by in an entry-level job." "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she began hesitantly, "but I think you should know. Your parents remortgaged their house 6 months ago." "What? Why?" "Amber convinced your father to invest in a boutique real estate concierge service she wanted to start. Some concept about connecting luxury property buyers with designers and lifestyle services." "How much?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. $300,000, Aunt Meredith replied. "The business lasted less than 6 months before folding. From what I can gather, most of the money went into an expensive office lease, high-end marketing materials, and hiring her sorority friends as consultants." I felt a complex mix of emotions: concern for my parents' financial security, frustration at their continued enabling of Amber, and a strange sense of detachment, as though I were hearing about distant relatives rather than my immediate family. "Have they told you any of this?" Aunt Meredith asked. "No," I replied. "We don't really discuss finances." The conversation reinforced my growing conviction that someday soon I would need to stop hiding my light, as Grandma Eleanor often urged. Not out of spite or for vindication, but because continuing to play the role they had assigned me was becoming increasingly dishonest. My 5th year at Kingston Financial brought another significant promotion. At 27, I became the youngest senior investment manager in the firm's history. The position came with substantially increased compensation, including a performance bonus structure that reflected my consistent ability to identify profitable investment opportunities. After years of disciplined saving and strategic investing, my net worth had grown to a level that seemed almost surreal, especially given my continued modest lifestyle. My colleagues still perceived me as the quiet, frugal analyst who drove a sensible used car and lived in an unremarkable apartment. One evening, sitting in my tiny studio, after another 14-hour workday, I made a decision. It was time to allow myself one significant indulgence, a space that reflected my success while still aligning with my values of quality and long-term investment. I began researching the Manhattan real estate market, looking for properties that would appreciate over time while providing the living space I now realized I craved. After viewing dozens of options, I found it. A penthouse apartment in a pre-war building on the Upper West Side with unobstructed views of Central Park. The space was not ostentatious by New York luxury standards, but it was undeniably high-end. 2 bedrooms, a chef's kitchen, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a private terrace. The price was substantial, even by Manhattan standards, but well within my means, especially since I planned to pay cash, avoiding a mortgage entirely. The purchasing process was straightforward but time-consuming, involving multiple inspections, board approvals, and paperwork. Throughout, I maintained my privacy, sharing details only with Rachel, who provided valuable input on the property's architectural merits and renovation potential. "It's a beautiful space," she said during our final walkthrough before closing. "But are you sure you're ready for such a change? This is light years away from Washington Heights." "I think I've earned it," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Once the purchase was complete, I took my time furnishing the space, working with Rachel to select quality pieces that would last for decades rather than following transient trends. The process was methodical and deeply satisfying, so different from the constant consumption and replacement cycle I had observed in my parents' home. During this period, I received a call from Grandma Eleanor. Her cancer had returned, more aggressively this time. Though she tried to downplay the seriousness, I immediately arranged to visit her in Chicago the following weekend. Sitting in her living room, surrounded by photos from her 74 years of life, we talked more openly than ever before. "I want you to know how proud I am of you, Drew," she said, her voice steady despite her weakened condition. "Not just of what you've achieved, but of how you've achieved it, with integrity." "I've had good examples," I replied, reaching for her hand. "I've been thinking about my birthday next month," she continued. "The big 75. Your father wants to host a dinner at that new restaurant downtown, the Meridian. I'll be there, I promised." "Good." She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "Drew, I hope you'll consider sharing more of yourself with the family, not just the parts you think they want to see." "You mean tell them about my finances? My apartment?" I asked, surprised by her directness. "I mean stop hiding your light," she replied. "You've spent so many years being overlooked that you've made it a habit to stay in the shadows, but that serves no one, least of all yourself." Her words stayed with me during the flight back to New York. Was I still playing the role assigned to me years ago? The overlooked son, the one who would always be fine on his own? By maintaining this facade, was I actually reinforcing their misconceptions? The week before Grandma Eleanor's birthday dinner, Aunt Meredith called me. "Are you coming in for the dinner?" she asked without preamble. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." "Good. Because you should know what's been said." Her tone had an edge I rarely heard. "I was at your parents' house last weekend, and Amber was there with her new boyfriend, some hedge fund analyst she's trying to impress." "And?" I prompted when she paused. "Your name came up, and Amber told this guy that you were just getting by in some back-office financial job in New York." Your father nodded along and added that you were not as ambitious as your sister, but that you seemed content with your simple life. I felt a familiar twinge of hurt, quickly followed by resignation. Of course they would frame my life this way. It fit their established narrative. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm tired of it, Drew. I'm tired of watching them dismiss you when you've accomplished more than they could imagine, and I'm tired of you allowing it." Her words hit home, aligning with Grandma Eleanor's gentle encouragement. Perhaps it was indeed time to stop playing a role that no longer fit, if it ever had. The night before flying to Chicago, I sat on my penthouse terrace, looking out at the glittering lights of Central Park. Rachel joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "Have you decided?" she asked, knowing the internal debate I'd been having. "I think so," I replied. Not to create drama, but because continuing to hide significant parts of my life has become dishonest. "Whatever you decide, I support you," she said, leaning against my shoulder. "Just remember why you're doing it, not for their reaction, but for your truth." As my flight touched down in Chicago the next day, I felt a curious mixture of anticipation and calm. After years of living in the shadows of my family's perceptions, I was finally ready to step into my own light. The Meridian was exactly the type of restaurant my father would choose. Expensive without being innovative, impressive to his social circle without requiring actual culinary sophistication. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and staff in formal attire glided between tables covered in pristine white linens. I arrived early, giving myself time to compose my thoughts and greet Grandma Eleanor before the others arrived. She was already seated at our reserved table, elegant in a blue dress I recognized from several Christmases past. "Drew," she smiled, her face lighting up as I bent to kiss her cheek. "You look wonderful." "So do you," I replied, taking the seat beside her. "How are you feeling?" "Well enough for cake," she said with a wink. and to see all my family together. We chatted quietly until the others began to arrive. Aunt Meredith came next, giving me a meaningful look as she took the seat on Grandma Eleanor's other side. My parents arrived together, Dad in a business suit despite the Saturday evening, Mom in an outfit that looked newly purchased. Amber was last, making an entrance in a designer dress, her boyfriend Todd trailing behind her. He looked the part of a hedge fund analyst, from his expensive watch to his carefully casual demeanor that suggested he considered himself slightly above the proceedings. "Sorry we're late," Amber announced, not sounding particularly sorry. Traffic was insane coming from our side of town. Introductions were made, drinks were ordered, and the predictable family dynamics began to unfold. Amber dominated the conversation, detailing her latest projects at our father's company and the exclusive industry events she had attended. "We're repositioning the entire brand," she explained, gesturing with a manicured hand. Dad finally agreed that we need to target the luxury market exclusively. Dad nodded along proudly while Mom added supporting comments. Grandma Eleanor listened politely but kept glancing at me with a subtle smile that suggested she was waiting for something more interesting to happen. When the appetizers arrived, I presented Grandma Eleanor with her gift, a leather-bound photo album I had carefully assembled. "This is just part one," I explained as she opened it. "It's photographs of us together from each year of my life, with notes about what you taught me that year." Grandma Eleanor's eyes misted as she turned the pages slowly. "Oh, Drew, this is precious." Amber, clearly irritated by the attention shift, thrust a small gift bag toward our grandmother. "This is from me. Sorry it's not wrapped. It was a crazy week." Inside was a generic department store scarf with the price tag still attached. Grandma Eleanor thanked her politely, while Amber quickly redirected the conversation to her recent spa weekend. As the main courses arrived, Todd began talking about his work, dropping names of financial institutions and boasting about deals he had supposedly influenced. "The Manhattan market is absolutely on fire right now," he declared, "especially for luxury properties. I just advised a client on a Park Avenue purchase that will appreciate 20% in 18 months, guaranteed." Dad engaged eagerly, always interested in real estate trends. "What about the Upper West Side? I hear that market is stabilizing." "Depends on the building and the view," Todd replied with the unearned confidence of someone repeating something they've heard but don't fully understand. "Central Park views are always premium, but you're looking at 8 figures minimum for anything worthwhile." I had been quiet throughout most of the dinner, observing the familiar patterns and waiting for an organic opening. This seemed as good as any. "The park is beautiful in autumn," I commented mildly. "The colors from above are particularly striking." "From above?" Amber asked sharply, always quick to detect any potential spotlight theft. "What do you mean, from above? Your walk-up in Washington Heights barely has a view of the street, let alone Central Park." There was a moment of perfect silence at the table. Aunt Meredith suppressed a smile while Grandma Eleanor watched intently. My parents looked confused, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "Actually," I replied calmly, "I moved recently." "Oh?" Mom said, making an effort at interest. "A new apartment?" "Yes, on Central Park West." I took a sip of water. The penthouse, specifically. The silence that followed was profound. Dad's fork, halfway to his mouth, froze mid-air before clattering onto his plate. Mom blinked rapidly as though trying to process information in a foreign language. Amber's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then rising anger. "That's not possible," she finally sputtered. "You can't afford that. You've always been barely getting by." "Actually, I've been doing quite well," I replied. "I'm a senior investment manager at Kingston Financial. Have been for over a year now." But you bring bag lunches to work," Amber protested, repeating a detail I had once mentioned during a family dinner. "And you lived in that tiny apartment in Washington Heights." "I chose to live below my means and invest the difference," I explained. "It's been an effective strategy." "This is ridiculous." Amber's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. "You expect us to believe you bought a penthouse on Central Park West? Those cost millions of dollars? 4.2 million, to be precise," I said quietly, though I negotiated them down to 3.8. Dad found his voice at last. Drew, is this some kind of joke? Or did you get into some kind of trouble? His implication was clear. The only way I could afford such a property was through something illegal or unethical. No trouble, Dad. Just 14-hour days, careful investing, and compound interest. I maintained my calm tone. I paid cash. No mortgage. Amber stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is just another attempt to steal attention on Grandma's birthday. You've always been jealous of me, always trying to make yourself seem special when we all know you're just ordinary. Amber, please sit down, Mom pleaded, looking around at the other diners who were now openly watching our table. No, I won't sit here and listen to these ridiculous lies. Amber's voice had risen to a near shriek. He's making this all up. He's always been the jealous one, the one who couldn't stand that Mom and Dad loved me more. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for my sister whose identity was so wrapped up in being the favorite that my success threatened her entire sense of self. Dad was staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and something else. Fear, perhaps, or the dawning realization that he had fundamentally misunderstood his own son for decades. Then Aunt Meredith stood up, placing both hands on the table as she leaned forward. Her voice was steady but carried an unmistakable intensity. Enough, Amber. Drew isn't lying. I've seen his penthouse. I've known about his success for years. She took a deep breath. And while we're finally being honest with each other, there's something else that needs to be said. Something that explains a lot about this family dynamic. The table fell completely silent. All eyes on Aunt Meredith. James, she said, looking directly at our father, I've respected your choices for 28 years. I've watched you overcompensate out of guilt. But this has gone too far for too long. Dad's face drained of color. Meredith, don't. Amber isn't your biological daughter, Aunt Meredith said firmly, and I think everyone here deserves to know the truth. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Grandma Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, suggesting this wasn't news to her. Amber stood frozen, her anger replaced by shock. What are you talking about? Amber whispered. Mom had an affair, Aunt Meredith continued, her eyes still fixed on Dad. You were conceived during a rough patch in their marriage. Dad chose to stay, to raise you as his own, but his guilt and overcompensation have created this dysfunctional family dynamic where Drew has been overlooked and you've been spoiled to your own detriment. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient restaurant noise seemed to have faded away. Amber stared at our father, silently pleading for denial, but his expression confirmed the truth. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and fled the restaurant, Todd awkwardly following after a moment's hesitation. Dad buried his face in his hands while Mom began to cry quietly. Aunt Meredith remained standing, her posture suggesting she was prepared to defend her decision to reveal this secret after so many years. Grandma Eleanor reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it gently. When I turned to her, she gave me a sad smile that somehow conveyed both regret for the painful scene and relief that the truth was finally out. I think, I said quietly, we all need some time to process this, but Grandma still deserves her birthday celebration. I signaled to the waiter, who had been hovering uncertainly nearby. Can we please have the cake now? In that moment, amidst the wreckage of family secrets and long-held misconceptions, I realized that true wealth had little to do with penthouses or investment portfolios. It was found in the capacity to remain composed when others fall apart, to seek resolution when others seek escape, and to recognize that even painful truths offer the possibility of healing. The days following Grandma Eleanor's birthday dinner were eerily quiet. Amber wasn't answering calls from anyone in the family. Mom retreated into herself, alternating between tears and long silences. Dad seemed to age overnight, the confident real estate broker replaced by a man grappling with the consequences of decades of secrets and unequal treatment. I extended my Chicago stay, partly out of concern for Grandma Eleanor, and partly because I sensed that leaving immediately would only deepen the family fracture. On the third day after the dinner, Dad called and asked if I would meet him for coffee. We sat across from each other at a small cafe near his office, two men who shared DNA, but had never truly known each other. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. "I owe you an apology," Dad finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Many apologies, actually." I waited, giving him space to continue. "What Meredith said at dinner. It's true." He stared into his coffee cup. "Your mother and I went through a difficult period when you were about 2. We separated briefly. During that time, she had a relationship with someone else. When she told me she was pregnant with Amber, I had a choice to make." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "I chose to stay, to rebuild our marriage, to raise Amber as my own. No one else knew except Meredith and your grandmother." "And that's why you always favored her?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Dad winced at the word favored but didn't deny it. I was overcompensating. I was so afraid that somewhere deep down I would treat her differently that I went too far in the other direction. And in the process, I failed to see you clearly. "For what it's worth," I said after a moment, "I think you did love her as your own, but you created a dynamic where Amber never had to earn anything or face consequences. That wasn't good for her either." Dad nodded slowly. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time I realized I would need to create my own path without much support," I replied honestly. "It forced me to think deeply about what I actually wanted from life." "And the penthouse? Your career? Is that all real?" he asked. In response, I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of my apartment, my office, the view from my terrace. With each image, his expression shifted from disbelief to a complex mixture of pride and regret. "I'd like to see it someday," he said quietly. "If you'd be willing." "You're all welcome any time," I replied, surprised to find I meant it. The conversation shifted to Amber, who was staying with a friend and refusing contact with our parents. Dad seemed genuinely concerned about her ability to process this revelation. "She's built her entire identity around being special, being the favorite," he said. "I'm worried about how she'll cope when that foundation is shaken." "Give her time," I advised. "And when she's ready to talk, be honest with her. About everything, including the fact that your choices weren't her fault." When I returned to my hotel room that evening, I found a text message from Amber. "Can we talk? Alone?" We met the following morning, at a small park near our childhood home. Amber looked different somehow, her usual polished appearance replaced by something more subdued, more authentic. "Is it true," she asked without preamble, "about Dad not being my biological father?" "Yes," I replied simply. "But he chose you, Amber. He chose to be your father in every way that matters." She was quiet for a long moment. "And the penthouse? Your job? Is that all real too?" "Yes. Why didn't you tell us?" "Tell me? Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. "Or would you have found a way to dismiss it to maintain the family narrative?" Her silence was answer enough. "I'm not sure who I am anymore," she finally said, her voice small. "If I'm not James and Catherine Russell's golden child, then who am I?" "You're still Amber," I replied. "You're still capable and charming and socially intelligent. Those are real qualities. You just need to learn to use them in more productive ways." We talked for nearly 2 hours, more honestly than we ever had before. Amber admitted to feeling increasingly hollow as years passed with nothing substantial to show for all the advantages she'd been given. I acknowledged the resentment I'd carried and how it had fueled both my drive and my secrecy. "I don't want to be the person they made me," she said as we prepared to leave. "The entitled one who can't function in the real world." "Then don't be," I replied simply. "It's never too late to rewrite your story." Over the next several months, a cautious healing began within our family. I invited everyone to New York to see my penthouse, an invitation accepted with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Mom and Dad arrived first, their awkwardness gradually giving way to genuine interest in my life. Grandma Eleanor came next, her pride evident as she walked through each room, occasionally reminding me of conversations we'd had years earlier about my dreams and goals. Amber was the last to visit, arriving alone after ending her relationship with Todd. She walked around silently for several minutes before speaking. "You built all this yourself," she said. "Not a question but a realization, without anyone's help." "Not entirely without help," I corrected. "Grandma Eleanor believed in me. So did Aunt Meredith. and I had professors and mentors who recognized my potential. But not Mom and Dad, she finished. They gave me other things, I said, surprising myself with the genuine forgiveness I felt. Stability, a safe home, the freedom to find my own way. Amber's visit marked a turning point in our relationship. For the first time, she asked for my advice about her career and finances, listening with genuine interest rather than competitive defensiveness. In the year that followed, our family underwent a transformation that none of us could have predicted. Dad stepped back from actively managing his real estate business, acknowledging that retirement was closer than he'd been willing to admit. Mom began therapy to address the guilt and secrets she'd carried for decades. Their marriage, surprisingly, seemed stronger for having finally confronted the truth. Amber, perhaps most surprisingly, showed the greatest change. She enrolled in business courses at a local college, approaching education with a seriousness she'd never shown before. She continued working at our father's company, but insisted on starting at an appropriate entry-level position and earning any advancement. "I want to know that I can do this," she explained during one of our now regular phone calls, "that I have value beyond being the favorite." I found myself in the unexpected position of mentor to my younger sister, helping her understand financial statements, business strategy, and professional ethics. She proved to be a quick learner when properly motivated. Grandma Eleanor's health stabilized enough for her to witness these family transformations, something she described as the best gift of my senior years. During one of my visits to Chicago, she confided that she had always known about Amber's parentage, but had respected my parents' decision to keep it private. "I just wish they had found a healthier way to handle it," she said, "without making you the collateral damage. I'm not sure I would be who I am without that experience," I reflected. Having to forge my own path made me stronger in ways I might not have been otherwise. My relationship with Rachel deepened throughout this period of family reconciliation. She met my family during their various New York visits, observing the changing dynamics with insightful compassion. "You're good for them," she told me one evening as we sat on our terrace watching the sunset over Central Park. "You've broken the pattern without breaking the family." The culmination of our family's transformation came a year after the revelatory birthday dinner. I hosted Thanksgiving in my penthouse, the first time our entire family, including Aunt Meredith, had gathered since that fateful night. As we sat around the dining table, the conversation flowing more naturally than it ever had before, I looked at each face and realized that true success wasn't measured in square footage or investment returns. It was found in the courage to live authentically, to break destructive patterns, and to offer others the chance to do the same. When Grandma Eleanor raised her glass for a toast, her eyes met mine with a knowing smile. "To truth," she said simply, "and to the light that follows when we stop hiding in shadows." Later that evening, as Rachel and I stood on the terrace looking out at the city lights, I shared my plans to propose to her on Christmas Eve. Her smile told me she suspected as much, but would pretend to be surprised. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" I asked, pulling her close against the November chill. "What's that?" "That adversity shaped me without hardening me, that I found success without losing my humanity, and that I found someone who sees me clearly, not as the overlooked son or the secret millionaire, but simply as myself." The journey from that overlooked child to the man I had become was longer and more complex than any Manhattan real estate transaction or investment strategy. But standing there, with the woman I loved and a healing family inside, I knew that every step had been necessary, every challenge worthwhile. Have you ever experienced family favoritism or had to create your own path when others underestimated you? Comment below and share your story. If you found value in this journey of self-creation and family reconciliation, please like this video, subscribe to see more authentic life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that success is possible, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey, and may you find the courage to step into your own light, whatever form that takes.